Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly and I have the privilege of leading the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. Before we get started, I'd like to say thank you to our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union. Consumers Credit Union loves to say yes to their customers, so please visit consumerscu.org to learn more. All right, so Brian, there was action on the tax bill that we've been following and reporting on extensively, and we do have a lot to unpack here. So let's get started. Let's start with the size of this bill. It says there is a reduction in overall taxes, but what is the real impact?
Yeah, it is a big tax bill. There's a bunch of different concepts that were packed into one single bill that were originally contemplated in other bills. And so they were put in there. And in terms of the overall impact, in terms of reduction in taxes that businesses and individuals pay, it's been billed as $1 billion tax cut. And that's true, but it's actually bigger than that in the sense that that the bill, the way that it passed, preserved a different tax cut that was already scheduled to happen. So when you add it all together, it phases in over 4 years, but the impact, the overall impact, the reduction in taxes after this bill passes and the other tax reduction takes effect will be more like $1.6 billion.
Okay, let's kind of talk about some of the more straightforward parts. There are changes in the retiree exemptions. So what changed there, and do they align with SBAM's goals?
We actually did make some pretty good progress in this area as compared to the original concept in the originally introduced bill. So you might ask, well, why does SBAM have a position on retirement system taxes? It's because we want private sector employees to be treated on par or equitably as compared to people on pensions or people in public retirement systems. So that change was made. That was one of the things that was, I want to say, a little bit under the radar. They didn't make a big deal about it when they changed it, but the bill as it was originally introduced would have treated public sector employees more generously on their retirement taxes on retirement income as compared to private sector. And that got mostly cleared up. There's still preferential treatment for law enforcement, police, fire, correction officers included in there. Law enforcement still has unlimited exemptions like they were in the originally introduced bill. Everybody else gets an exemption that will phase in over 4 years. If you read the bill, it actually is kind of confusing to follow, but let me try to simplify it. There is an overall exemption, and it's adjusted by inflation each year. And that number was, let's just say, $42,000 per person or $84,000 per joint filer, and that's for public or private sector retirees. But that number gets indexed. That's the number that's in the bill, but it gets indexed from the base year in 2007. Just happens to be when the base year is. They have not published, as far as I know, they haven't published what the new number is, but it will be well over 55 and 110,000 once they figure in the inflation impact, and it might be even closer to 6120 with inflation, because that's a lot of years of inflation, and some of the recent years were pretty big in terms of the inflation adjustment. So at the end of 4 years, you will see that that exemption available for everybody who has retirement income. But it phases in over 4 years. That means what you get to do right now, you have 20 and 40,000 exemptions if you're a retiree or of retirement age. You get 20,000 for a single filer or 40,000 for a joint filer. And what this says is you can take that deal, or 25% of this new deal, and then next year you could take the old deal, or 50% of the new deal, and then the year after that 75% of the new deal being the new bigger exemptions, and then the fourth year 100% of the new exemptions. So it takes 4 years to phase in, but overall, anybody with an IRA, 401k, public pension, private pension is going to come out ahead when it comes to the way their retirement income is taxed. Now, keep in mind, back in 2011, retirement income was treated, it used to be treated unevenly, then it was made all across as 20 and 40,000 exemptions. It's been at that level. This essentially keeps the principles of that 2011 tax reform to treat retirees more evenly, but increases the size of the exemption. So given the fact the state has a $9 billion surplus and is now operating on but the proposed budget of 79 billion compared to 2011 when it was, I think, 46 billion. It makes a lot of sense to share that money back with the taxpayers that have provided the state really with the windfall.
So Brian, what about working seniors? How are they impacted?
So working seniors was one of the areas I'd say a disappointment in the bill. What we wanted to see was that working seniors, once you hit retirement age, that you got the same exemptions that a retiree would get. With the idea being, hey, if a person doesn't want to retire yet, or if they can't afford to retire yet, why should they be taxed more than people who can afford to retire? That didn't make it into the final bill, but they still get to keep the exemptions that were put in place in 2011. So working seniors do not come out ahead because of these retirement exemptions, but they also don't come out behind either. So for working seniors, it's age-based. Once you hit a certain age, you get $20,000 and $40,000 exemptions for single or joint filers, and that stays exactly the same.
Okay, let's talk next about the earned income tax credit. SBAM supported increasing this tax credit. So there were a lot of numbers thrown around. Where did things get settled? And again, let's tell everybody what the EITC is and what it does.
Yeah, so this stands for the Earned Income Tax Credit. It is a federal tax credit. It's been around for about 40 years. And this federal tax credit is meant to essentially reward people who work, even if they can only get lower income jobs. And it's the reason that SBAM and business associations tend to like this approach as opposed to other types of social services is because it's for people who go to work. It's an incentive to work, or at least a reward to work, as opposed to a lot of the ways that we help people with social services that discourage work, or sometimes make it so that a person would come out further behind if they went back to work. So we like the earned income tax credit because it is for working individuals. Now, the earned income tax credit is also pretty simple to implement because it's a piggyback on that federal tax credit. So here's how it works. If you qualify for this, so you're a lower income worker, you qualify for the earned income tax credit, then when you file your federal tax return, you calculate this credit. The way Michigan's portion works is that you just take that federal credit, and in the past you got a 6% add-on. So if your federal credit was $1,000, you would get a 6% add-on at the state level. In other words, you'd get $60. And what this does is it makes it so that it is now next year it will be 30%. So the earned income tax credit will be 30% of whatever your federal tax credit is. So it's a pretty big, a pretty big increase. And again, this is one of these areas where we see labor force participation rates low. We see kind of a cliff impact on social services, where sometimes a person will kind of manage their lives underneath these social service cliffs in order to not exceed where they qualify for benefits. The earned income tax credit can really be a way to make it so that a person doesn't lose when they go back to work. So all those things mean that it gets it's viewed generally favorably by business associations like ours. And there is a provision in the bill that said that it goes into effect in the current year, 2022, at 24% of the federal tax credit, and then going up next year to 30. But since the bill did not get immediate effect, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. That part won't take effect. Only starting next year will it take effect. Again, this is all assumes that the governor signs the legislation, but the governor did put out a press release congratulating the legislature on passing this, which means that I would think she plans to sign it. So this is, we view both of these things, the retirement, private sector retirees being treated more equitably with public sector retirees, and increasing the earned income tax credit being two priorities of the Small Business Association, things that we were pushing for, asking for, and proposing. I actually even went in and testified in committee on the earned income tax credit. That these parts of the bills, big win for small business owners.
Do we have an idea of how many people this will impact, and by how much?
The earned income tax credit, if you think about our overall population is about 10 million in Michigan. The earned income tax credit it'll impact about 700,000 people. So it'd be the 700,000 lowest income Michiganders. So it's not the majority of the workforce, it's not insignificant either. That's a lot of people. And so 700,000 households, so not people, actually households, I guess, was the way that the fiscal agencies estimated it. It comes to about $385,000 or $385 million. So that's, remember when I said in the beginning, it was $1 billion in tax cuts plus another 600 million or so, about a 1.6 billion total impact. Once it's all phased in, 385 million of that is for the earned income tax credit. And if you were to just kind of do the math, how big a difference does it make for any individual household? About $550. So you may, if you pay really close attention, you may have seen in press releases and speeches, people saying the combined effect of the earned income tax credit increase is $3,150. I've seen that number a bunch of times. And because I know the state budget, I know tax policy, and I know the earned income tax credit, I knew it couldn't possibly be $3,150. It would be something less than $600. And so in getting to the bottom of it, where does this $3,000 number come from? What they're doing is taking the federal tax credit and adding the state to it, saying total between the state and the federal, it's $3,150. But that is not the new part. Most of that is already in place, and people that qualify already get it. The new part will be, on average, $550.
All right, let's talk about rebate checks. We heard a lot about these $180 rebate checks. What happened to those?
The bill has the rebate checks in it, but they will not be happening. So the rebate check was a one and done thing. It was proposed as a one-time payment out of 2022 general fund dollars. So it was a kind of an accounting, I'll say accounting gimmick, really what it was, an accounting maneuver where they would pay refunds out of, or rebate checks out of 2022 dollars, almost like time travel, go back in time and pretend like the money never hit the general fund. We'll talk about it next, why they did that, but that did not get immediate effect. Our Constitution says that you need a super majority of legislators in the House and the Senate to vote to give immediate effect to a bill, or else it doesn't go into effect until the next fiscal year. So whenever the final session of the year, and then you count out 3 months from there, and that's when bills take effect, unless they have a super majority granting immediate effect. This bill did not get that, which means that the rebate checks won't happen. Instead, that whole thing about moving money from one fiscal year back and counting it like it didn't ever hit the general fund. That accounting maneuver will not happen.
All right, so as you're saying right now, there's no rebate checks, the accounting adjustment didn't happen. Why is that important?
It's important because that was the mechanism by where they were trying to eliminate a reduction in the income tax rate. So by doing these rebate checks out of the 2022 general fund, what they were doing is making it so that when they closed the books on the 2022 year, which has not happened yet, when they close the books, they want to show that revenue is lower, because in law it says when revenue grows way faster than inflation, you must reduce the tax rate on the taxpayers. So taxpayers gave you a windfall, state government, you got to give a little bit of it back. That's the way that the law is written today. And for reasons I still don't understand, there was this determination not to allow this tax cut that is already built into law. And so they were going to do kind of the bright, shiny object. Hey, we're going to give these tax rebates, but do it in a way that created an accounting maneuver to cancel the permanent tax cut. And the legislature, thankfully, the majority of the people in the legislature, or at least enough to block immediate effect, said, no, we're not doing the accounting gimmicks. The permanent tax cut that is already in law that impacts the rates that small businesses pay and individuals pay, we're not taking it away from them. And so that's where this bill actually has a bigger impact than how it was advertised. They said it was $1 billion tax cut, but it also preserves about a $600 to $650 million permanent tax cut in the form of reducing the income tax rate that small businesses are taxed on and individuals are taxed on. So we do expect that, based on the windfall of cash that the state received in this last year and how much bigger it was than inflation, that the rate should roll back. The income tax rate should roll back from 4.25 to 4.05%. That's an estimate, but I expect that, again, unless there's other shenanigans that are played, that it'll be very, very close to that.
All right, so is it a done deal?
It's actually kind of a complicated question to answer. And so what I'll say is the legislature's part is done. The legislature is done with the legislation. They passed it, did not give it immediate effect. And as of last night, they sent it on to the governor. The governor had a press release congratulating the legislature on passing it, which means she plans to sign it. So I want to say, yes, it's a done deal. This rate is gonna go down as soon as they close the financial books. The House Fiscal Agency, the Senate Fiscal Agency, and the Treasury Department. Those are the three agencies in the law that do the calculations, that they'll determine and reduce the rate. The Senate Majority Leader set expectations that the rate would go down. The House Fiscal Agency Director also established, really set that expectation. The last consensus revenue estimating conference set that expectation. And really the only thing that's putting question out there into the system now is there's an attorney closely tied to Governor Whitmer, also worked for Governor Granholm before, who's come up with some new legal theories that maybe the way that this income tax rollback, this tax cut in the law was drafted in a way that makes it just a temporary reduction, or maybe it was not properly drafted at all, and so it shouldn't go into effect. I would hope that is this kind of I would call it creative legal theory to just try to put question in an area where nobody else has question, where the fiscal agencies and the Treasury Department did a consensus revenue estimating conference. They determined that taxpayers were due the reduction. They put the reduction into current and future years. I would hope that the professionalism of those organizations and the nonpartisan nature of those organizations would not be challenged, that they would not be leaned on to try to find some creative legal interpretation that would force the issue into court and take many more months. So yes, it should be a done deal, and absent very, very aggressive legal reinterpretation of what most people view to be very cut and dried, very straightforward. The absent from that type of aggressive reinterpretation, it should be a done deal.
Is there anything else we need to know about this bill?
There's one thing, and that is that there is an earmark put into the bill. Well, actually, two more things. First is that there's a calculation to make sure that the school aid fund is made whole. So there's a portion of the income tax that goes into the school aid fund, and it's written right into the law. That's, if you were to pull up House Bill 4001, you'll see that they took special care to make sure that as revenues go down with these tax cuts, that the school aid fund is made whole. So they've got that in there. The other thing that they have in there is an earmark on the corporate income tax. And it doesn't really matter where they put it. I think it was mainly for just kind of how it shows or how it presents, but they put an earmark for these large corporate incentives, the ones that have been in the news lately, a $500 million earmark from the corporate income tax into this strategic outreach and attraction reserve, the SOAR fund that you've heard in the news so much lately. So what this does is it creates a revenue stream into those large scale economic development project funds, without it being questioned every year, or at least there'll be a $500 million base that is created for these projects moving forward. That was put into the income tax bill as well.
So one of the recent deals that SOAR supported was the Ford plant we've talked about, and a bill moved through to provide additional support that they requested. So what does that look like?
Yeah, there was at the same time, in tandem with this previous bill, there was the tax bill that we've been talking the whole show about. There was also an appropriations bill that appropriated, ended up being $1.3 billion. Had several things in it, but including additional resources for Ford. So there's been a few rounds of this. There was the strategic fund did an award. There were tax incentive tax abatements where they could operate tax-free for 15 years, and then including like property taxes, personal property taxes, those sorts of things, and then also money for buying the land for Ford, doing the bulldozing and site prep and running sewer and water lines. It's a huge parcel of land. Let to build roads on it. The state's going to pay for those too. So there was a lot of additional dollars, and it comes to it's hard to tell with all these different sources, but somewhere between 1.6 and 1.7 billion dollars in incentives and cash and land and infrastructure that goes into this deal, which has raised some eyebrows. I mean, these projects are big, but given that we're talking about 2,500 jobs, which is that's a lot, but 1.6 billion is a lot. 1.7 billion. You're talking between $650,000 and $700,000 in incentives per job created, and these are like $45,000 a year jobs.
All right, we have a couple more subjects to tackle. The first is some statistics that the Detroit Free Press shared about voter turnout, looking at age and gender, and this was from the midterm elections. And Brian, I think you're going to share that with us and share those trends.
Yeah, this I found really interesting, and hats off to the Detroit Free Press. I subscribe to the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News, and Cranes and Dem Live for that matter as well. And they do a great job on a bunch of things. I thought this was really interesting. They broke out by age category and by gender voter turnout in the last 3 general elections. So these are the non-presidential elections. It'd be gubernatorial elections, 2014, 2018, and 2022. And right away, what sticks out is, well, I guess, aside from the fact that the older that you get, the more likely you are to vote. No difference there. I mean, that's how it's been. That's how it is. Why is there a determination to do bigger tax exemptions for seniors as opposed to younger people? Well, here's a good reason. Way higher voting percentage than anybody else. But the thing that really stuck out to me, and I pay close attention to these types of numbers, is look at the increase in the 18 to 21 year olds. They're almost up with the 20 to 30 year olds, the 22 to 30 year olds. So they were both back in 2014. If you were 18 to 21 years old, only 10% turned out in a midterm election. And now women that age are up almost 40%. That's almost as high as those that are well into their 20s and up to 30. And then when it comes to men, and then you've got, again, less than 10% turnout back in 2014 and up, close to 30%. Right across the board, women turn out more than men, generally speaking. That was not true about older voters, but that actually has started to become true about even older voters. But then if you look at the 22 to 30 year olds, look at how much those increase. Again, more pronounced among women than men, but those were at that 20% mark now. Women were at 20% for 20 to 30 year olds, but now up a little over 40%. So right across the board, you see higher participation in the midterm elections, but the difference among younger voters much more pronounced as compared to older voters. So older voters still king. They still are the ones that have the highest by a large margin, the overall turnout. But I was really pretty surprised when I saw just the nature of that turnout, especially since the analysis is based on midterm elections, not presidential elections, which presidential elections command way more attention and tend to result in higher overall turnout.
Okay, let's now switch gears and talk about Japan. They recently released their annual demographic data, and the population numbers are kind of startling. So tell us a little bit more about that and what it might indicate.
Yeah, this is, with Japan has struggled with population for a long time, and they're very, very tight on immigration too. So what's happening with their demographics inside Japan are they dictate what happens with their overall population. But for a long time, really for decades now, I think it's been this question is that when is that going to bottom out? When is Japan's population and demographic challenges going to kind of level? And it just hasn't happened. I think it's instructive for us to look at and not just assume that, hey, we're running into some demographic challenges too. Nowhere near as pronounced as Japan is right now, but I think it would behoove us to make sure that is not foreshadowing for our future and for other more developed countries where we do see birth rates dropping. We do see population growth stagnating. So, but these stats I thought were worthy of sharing. The country saw just under 800,000 births. 40 years ago, so in 2022, just under 800,000 births. Back 40 years ago, in 1982, there were 1.5 million births. So it's almost halved in the last 40 years, the total number of people born in Japan. They also, though, reported a record high post-war deaths last year, so post-World War II, 1.58 million deaths in Japan in 2022. 800,000 births, almost 1.6 million deaths. It's about a 2-to-1 ratio. So here in Michigan, remember, it was big news. We had a few years in a row more deaths than births. So just a little bit upside down on our demographics, and but not too much, right? They were pretty close, just less. The Japan at 2-to-1, and it's just startling. It was a startling type of a development or release, and I think would be instructive for all Western societies that are seeing this leveling off of the population to really contemplate, like, what does this mean for our future? As we are always thinking in terms of workforce development and people in the workforce and labor force participation, but we're fighting against some pretty strong demographic trends and challenges. But Japan may be a few decades ahead of where some other countries could be in the future.
All right. Well, thank you, Brian. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope we'll see you back here Monday at 3 p.m.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Monday.